If there's child abuse, that's reportable. What we don't see, which is very significant, is that childhood attachment also has to do with neglect.
Yeah.
So that's a significant contributor to insecure attachment styles.
I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, and I guess it's the work that we're doing and other people do, but that when we're talking about trauma, it's not just physical abuse. Welcome to episode 4 of the Superpowered Evolution podcast, folks. It's series 1, Fight for Your Life, all about not having to do that anymore. Today we're diving into attachment theory, meaning we're exploring and answering questions like, how do our childhood experiences affect our adult relationships? Why is it so hard to break free from old patterns? And most importantly, we touch on what you can actually do about that. It's big work, guys. It's not one podcast. Whether you feel stuck, overwhelmed, or like nothing you've tried has worked, this episode is about finding some small practical shifts that will make a difference. So let's get into it, and I will see you at the end for a wrap up and to give you some actionable steps. And a final reminder before we head into today's conversation, pause if you need to, seek comfort if you need to, grab a teddy bear, a plushy dreadful, a blankie, a cup of tea. And as you listen, make sure you write any questions in the comments for us to come back to. The best spot to do that if you're listening to a podcast is the YouTube channel, which is Andrea Louise Rose, one word, and that's Andrea with an I. Please like and subscribe to my channel and make comments and stuff because it helps. Thank you so much. We're talking today about how trauma shows up in adult relationships. I'm Andrea, and this is Gary. Hi, Gary.
I'm Gary. This is Andrea.
Thanks for joining me again. So I'm just going to check my notes just because I've made quite specific notes about the introduction. What we're doing today is talking about how trauma shows up in adult relationships. So there's things that we do have seen, have had done to us, and looking at why those things occur, where they come from. And then we're going to have a little look at what the work is done, what work has been done to help people around their trauma and what that's called, how that looks. So let's get into it. How does trauma show up? Shall we head to that handout first, or did you want to chat about something? Any thoughts first, Gary? No?
So we're going to get into a branch of psychology, and it's called attachment theory. It has a home of its own in the neo-Freudian stream for people who think in terms of, the different branches of psychology. And fundamentally what that means in a nutshell is that the things that affect us in later life had their origins in our very early life. So that sort of determinism of Freudian thinking lies behind attachment theory. The significant creator, or I suppose person who teased this out, was a man named John Bowlby, and there were a couple of other significant contributors very early on. So that's where it started.
Cool. Good to know.
Yeah. Okay.
And I thought before, actually, because this is a podcast as well as a visual thing, so we'll use a visual prompt soon to help with discussion. But I thought, we often share our own stories and stories of people that we've met. I know when we spoke about this last time, you reminded me of an old flame that had come back. I actually listened to the podcast the other day to make this timestamps. And I remember something you said to me back then. I told you about what had happened, and you're like, oh, he's avoidant attached, or do you know his attachment style? It sounds avoidant or whatever. And it was a really strange experience because he was totally chasing me down and was very obviously flirting. And then when he just jumped ship and made like I got the wrong idea, which I didn't, checked with you and 2 other men, and everyone was like, yep, that was really weird on his part. But you were saying that I think for people who are avoidant attached, they want to know that they are liked, but then as soon as you're like, yeah, I like you, they run away. Is that like a thing?
Well, they don't want any emotional demands made on them. So that's the core of the avoidant type. Should we first talk about secure attachment?
Oh, look, that's a lovely idea. Let's talk about the ideal, and then we'll go to the hell we all live in. No, I'm joking.
not that we probably know many people who are securely attached. When I started teaching 20 odd years ago, the figures were that 60% of people are securely attached. And that means those are the people who can sort of access their reason, stay cool, calm, and collected at any given moment. Their emotions act as information for them. They can interact with other people accordingly. If something's not right in a relationship, they can talk about it, and so on and so on. So what I started by saying 60% of people were securely attached. Now, 20 odd years later, those figures have almost flipped around. So they're now saying between 45 and 50% of people, between 40 and 45% of people are securely attached. And I'm interested in
who they count.
Does that mean that the research has gotten better around these things, or that we live in a society where the demands on families, for example, because again, this is an early childhood, has its origins in early childhood, but there's so much pressure on families in the last generation that in fact that many more people have insecure attachment styles. So that's an interesting question, I think, culturally or sociologically.
Yeah, and even if it's right, because you started off by saying we probably don't know many people who are securely attached. So to me, I feel like only 20% of people might be securely attached. And also thinking about the statistics around abuse, trauma, what is it, like 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 people, say 3.5.
That we know of.
Yeah. I have been through. So then if that's the case, how is that statistic, the other statistic, true?
So that is what we know, because those are reportable incidences. If there's child abuse, that's reportable. What we don't see, which is very significant, is that childhood attachment also has to do with neglect. So that's a significant contributor to insecure attachment styles.
I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, and I guess it's the work that we're doing and other people do, but that when we're talking about trauma, it's not just sexual abuse or physical abuse. It's, I'm saying this generally, but someone's violence towards another person, or someone's demands, like in traditional old school marriages where maybe the dad was really full on toward the mum and the other person's grown up watching that. And it might not be as far as physical violence, but emotional violence. And people don't realize that emotional violence has actually had an impact on their view of the world and the way they treat people and that kind of thing.
And it's worth saying, I think I probably alluded to this before, not all causes of relational trauma, because attachment styles is to some degree or another a form of relational trauma, although it might not actually fit the trauma playbook. But so it's not all intentional. If we talk about child abuse or child neglect, you'd have to say the adult care has a lot of agency in whether that happens or not. But you have to think of instances where, for example, the father might be absent for whatever reason, and the mother might have postnatal depression or have a mental health issue themselves. That would be a contributor there.
And I'm sure we've talked about it before, but like Gabor Mate talks about being a tiny baby in a war-torn country and the effect that had on his mum and other parental stress for their children and care for their children. And so then that's completely not anyone's fault, in that, of course, that's going to have an impact on somebody. But so some people would say, oh, I haven't been through trauma, but then you're like, well, your behavior tells me otherwise.
Oh, that's right. And I can see that quite clearly sometimes with my clients. Another thing that I don't know what age our listeners might be, but there was a whole generation that went through a type of parenting, working with babies, that was called controlled crying. You've heard of that. So
my nana tried to get me to do it with Johnny, and I ignored her.
Good for you. But so Bessel van der Kolk talks about that certainly on his talk on YouTube talk called "The Body Keeps the Score," and I can't remember if it's in the book, which I have read. But so just imagine being a baby with needs and being recommended by a very prominent and respected field of child rearing, that if you decide your child should sleep 8-hour nights at the age of 3 weeks, then what you do is you put that child in their room and you close that door.
Yeah.
And no matter what happens, you don't open that door again for 8 hours.
I think he does talk about it in the book, or I don't even know how much. Sometimes I listen to books and read books, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it was him or the other guy. Anyway, talking about the baby got left, but in that situation, but in the baby's desperation to try to get help, it actually, like, it was big enough to actually try to get itself out of the cot, and it fell and damaged the eardrum or something like that. And It was in some weird therapy session that the body memory came back, and that's how come they had a certain fear around something. And yeah, so they were left to cry and then injured themselves in trying to get help. That is so sad. Anyway,
right. Yeah,
we were going to be talking about secure attachment. So I'm just going to flip over to my little resource and see what it says. And then we'll talk about some of the ways that it shows up.
Insecure attachment.
Yes, that's right. So someone who is secure has low anxiety, that don't really avoid issues because they can talk about things, are comfortable to talk about things, are confident, and see themselves and others as good. So that's nice.
Yeah, yes, that's very nice. It's like a fairy tale world, right? For many of us. Yeah.
So
yes, so, and like other things, can I just say, like, I think it's worth understanding cultural context. And you've probably heard me say this before as well, but I'm a baby boomer. So my parents went through World War II. My father was in World War II. His father was in World War One. And he was injured in World War One. He was both shot and gassed. And he was not. No, my grandfather in World War One, and his war bride came over and had 2 children and promptly left him because he was not the man she married. She married him the first time. He was shipped back to England when he got shot. She worked in the hospital. That's where their romance bloomed. But the second time he was sent back was because he was gassed, and that left him a different person. Nevertheless, they were married, and she got the boat back to Canada, where I grew up, and he was not the person she had married, quite literally. So she had 2 children and left, and this was 1930s. This was, I don't know how it was experienced at the time, but I'm sure it was a very, very difficult thing to do. But so those 2 children were abandoned by their mother, and they were raised by their aunt. Their father lived in the same house. It was his sister's house. So they survived. And then my father went to World War II. The point is, there wasn't a lot of emotional currency with that generation, right? They were traumatized. 2 world wars in a generation apart. That's pretty traumatizing. And so, it's almost a cliche that people of my generation, born 10 years after the war ended, we were not allowed to be, never mind encouraged to be, emotionally intelligent people. If we showed emotion, it was ridiculed or shut down immediately.
Sorry. And then, so therefore, the cost of that is on parenting your own children, how you don't even have the information to parent in a way that promotes the ideal model of secure attachment in that generation. Anyone who's done pretty damn good has done pretty damn good, really. And we're just trying to evolve as a species.
Yeah, that is the logical, if we don't get into sort of self-examination and self-correction and so on, that would be the logical outcome. I do think lots of people of my generation, again, my generation is the one that turned the world upside down in the 1960s and 70s. So a part of that was doing everything the opposite of how our parents had been, although still those things go deep. So yes, my attachment style, when we come to it in a moment, I'll own up right now, is an avoidant attachment style. Because, the crux of the avoidant attachment style is emotional independence. But you can see how that would arise directly from the environment, the post-war environment that I grew up in. And there was a whole generation of men who were not emotionally conversant or emotionally intelligent. Mankind, I mean, the male mankind is kind of labeled for that now. That's something we wear as a male culture because it was true of at least 2 generations. And therefore, we can also call it intergenerational trauma because that's what it is.
And that's just back to the point I was saying earlier that a lot of people, I don't know if this was recorded because we were talking before about how people don't realize that trauma is actually so many things, and that you've explained something. Like the guy that I was talking about before was avoidant. But I guess there'd have to be some kind of scale. Like I know that theoretically we can move through to develop a more secure attached style. That's what the work's all about. But it sounds to me like some people are more extreme than others, I guess.
Yes, I think that's
because you're
very
married
true.
and have children and have been married for a long time, and you're avoidant attached, and so is that other guy. But he's like a hot mess. Not even that hot. I'm joking.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I had on the matter of avoidant attachment that arises out of emotional neglect. So avoidant attachment can come through other areas as well. But I have a client at the moment, and he wasn't aware when he was growing up the effect of his early environment on him. But he had no father figure, and there were anyway things that went on. But and when his wife left him a few short years ago, his world kind of took a big deep breath in at that time, and he looked to understand himself. And he has a sister who was very much into complex trauma, so she opened a door for him. And he read what to him was a fantastic book. I haven't read it, although it just arrived yesterday, on the basis of him saying it's a must read for anyone suffering from emotional neglect. And that book is called Running on Empty. The author's name escapes me at the moment, but it is about childhood neglect as opposed to childhood abuse. I wish I could report on the contents at the moment, but I haven't read it yet, but maybe in the future I can. So it's a thing unto itself, right? We don't have to talk about attachment theory or childhood trauma in a corporate grouping. We can talk about emotional neglect as a thing in itself, leading to trauma, and all early. We wouldn't say that everybody who has attachment issues are traumatized, but we can say everybody who's gone through developmental trauma, because that's invariably relational trauma, would have attachment issues.
Surely though, going back, I might just press share screen so we can talk to it for a minute. That's not true. As in, anyone who is dismissive, avoidant, preoccupied, anxious, what's the last one? Fearful, avoidant disorder, surely they would have been through some trauma to create that. How else would it create? Or some neglect, trauma.
Well, those things.
Well, we don't have to solve that problem today, but yeah.
No, but I don't think that we can say 55 to 60% of people have attachment issues. I don't think we can go quite that far with developmental trauma.
Those things saying that they all have developmental trauma.
Yeah, so that's not a seamless connection between those two things.
Someone will make it one day, I'm sure of it.
So some people might hold back in relationships because they've been teased, but not to the point of what you were talking already about the various degrees of each of these things. We can certainly have issues around attachment without arising from trauma.
That's true. And as in childhood trauma, because even like you said, teased, like you mean like being bullied at school kind of thing? When you say that, like let's say it's someone.
Yeah, although that can be traumatizing.
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of what I'm getting at. And same as relationships. So some people will just shut down the first time they have their heart broken.
Yeah,
and that's definitely a trauma, but not a childhood developmental trauma, which can affect.
Yeah, and I guess the question would be: would they have another go at it, and then another go at it? Because if they're able to go there, if they're not triggered just by virtue of having feelings for somebody who was severely traumatized because of those early relationships would step into relationships. If they stepped into relationships, they would be very sort of treading very carefully, let's say. And the way, so lots of people have traumatic events happen, but they don't all form trauma. Because that depends very much on the stabilizing context in which we live. So if we have secure attachment, we have people we can talk to, whether it's a mother or maybe a grandmother or grandfather, we can work through what might traumatize somebody else who didn't have those supports.
And we've talked about it in a previous one, I'm quite sure, where let's say we gave the example of the 10 soldiers in a tank. And it gets blown up and some people get injured and some people get taken away and all that kind of thing. Not everyone is going to get PTSD from it because of how they were brought up or their predisposition. Let's have a look at some of the ways that these show up. So we could look at the, just pushing all the buttons over here. Do you have any examples that you wanted to share of how it shows up, or should we just look at this to begin with, this little doodad? I will show you this one.
Well, let me talk about, so I'm not a great one for the sort of clinical details of things because I wasn't trained, say, in psychology to make diagnoses. I was trained in counseling, and then I educate myself according to what shows up. From what I didn't learn in counseling, I learned through hands-on experience. So attachment theory is very significant for people who come into a counseling room. I have only in the last 2 or 3 years realized how significant trauma is, but attachment issues even more so, whether they again arise from trauma or not. But the fencing that goes on, so we're talking mostly about, or maybe entirely about, our primary relationship or relationships.
Yeah, I'm talking about particularly adult intimate relationships. It could be friendship, or it could be, because I consider my close friends intimate friends, like in an intimate relationship. But yeah, just how it shows up. And then we can talk about how that happened to begin with. Yeah. So they did this. Why is that kind of thing? Yeah.
So most people who come into the counseling room have or have had significant relationships. So a part of, my initial conversation, which is fairly wide-ranging with people, I want to get the measure of them, as it were, not only what they're bringing into the room at the moment to work with, but also the things that impact on that. So I want, some of their background and so on and so on. And then according to what I hear, my thinking goes in particular directions, and trauma might be one of those directions. But so in relationships, as we will see when you bring up that information, what we will see is
You're about to baby backstory. Go on.
If I'm avoidant, as I have already confessed to be in relationship, I'm wanting the positive things that a relationship brings in my mind, but what I'm not wanting is somebody who wants a lot from me emotionally, right? That's what the avoidant, as I already said, tries to avoid. People making emotional claims on them. Now that, if my partner is an anxiously attached person, the anxiously attached person, what they need to know for their own emotional security is what's going on in you right now, right? Because they need to get their comfort from knowing where they stand with you at any or all given moments. And so if you have those people together, an anxiously attached person, again, as you said, depending on the degree of that anxiety, and an avoidantly attached person, they will be going in very different directions. The anxious person will be saying, what are you feeling? What do you think about me? That sort of thing. If not in actual words, they would have found a way to do that so that they can get the information without being too confronting. But as soon as the avoidant person recognizes, that they're asking for a piece of me that I'm not prepared to share, you can talk about the inner gesture kind of being like that. And they want to remain safe. The avoidant person wants to remain emotionally safe. and the anxious person doesn't feel safe until they know what the other person feels in regard to them.
And one thing I've noticed, because I know we've talked about it before, I'm not sure if it was on a podcast or not, but I've had it in relationships where it shifts entirely. So in one long-term relationship, I was the one who was like, don't come near me all the time. You're so annoying. Like, I had someone who wanted to do journaling with me. I'm like, it's a private activity. They wanted to train with me, and I was like, and then they complained all the time. Anyway, they were like, they were wanting to be with me all the time, and I was just like, oh my God, fuck off. And then it ended up, the tables completely turned by the end of the relationship, and I didn't, I facilitated the end of that one. But anyway, so that's interesting. So I am curious how you got married, if you're avoidant.
Yeah. So people go in and out of it. So there's lots of compensating things. To answer your question briefly, I have lots of compensating feelings and ways of being with people. Like I'm very supportive. I'm very big on respect and admiration and things like that. They go a long distance for me in relationship with people. And I'm an all-round nice guy. But lots of people, and I've had a number of clients who are therapists themselves, actually, and they can articulate this very well. In fact, I've learned a lot from my clients. But sometimes somebody can do a lot of pursuing, for example. So this is the dynamic of a couple that I had recently, both therapists. He pursued when he captured his quarry. And so the quarry was very avoidant, right? But when he got her, then he couldn't meet those emotional needs. So then he was fleeing the relationship. So he recognized his mother had mental health issues. So they were in and out of, one moment she loved him and the next moment she pissed him off, that sort of thing. So he was very used to moving in and moving out of that primary relationship when he was young. So anyway, he was doing the same thing in this relationship. But the question here is, if before we're involved, I don't really know how to be, but once we get entangled with each other, that's when my style comes out. So that's probably like maybe you, for example, you were fleeing in an avoidant way, but then there you were fully in relationship, and then, needing all the security of the anxiously attached person, of knowing what he thinks about you, where your relationship is at, and so on. But you had both of those things going on.
Yeah, I actually did a quiz when I first learned about attachment styles. I should probably do it again. I'll find it and share it.
You did a what? Sorry?
I did a quiz, test. I took a test, and I came up on, the way I put it, I should not swear so much, but oh well, equally fucked up on all three. I got literally 30-something% on all of the three kinds. And I remember you saying a while ago, I think you thought I was anxious attached, and I explained something I did, and you're like, oh no, that's very avoidant attached. I'm like, oh, I'm all of them, buddy. Whatever I need to get me out of the situation, I'll do. or I'll get attached and scared and anxious. But I've been single for the better part of 4 years now, so we'll test it sometime. Right. It's helpful.
So the, as I say, I had a young man, and he came from a very traumatized background. He was quite dysregulated, emotionally dysregulated. So I was interested, but every time he came, his partner, they're both very young. Well, 24 is very young by me. His partner was even younger. She was in the car each time they came. So I eventually asked him about their relationship, because we went through with most people, there are often indications that this kind of a conversation is helpful. When I had it with him, their relationship is really good, but they're both highly anxious people. So together, they might be the kind of people that if you or I went out to dinner with them, they might be all over each other, and we kind of think, oh my God, please. But it suits them both with each other, if you know what I mean, being all over each other, because they both really need the security of knowing.
Bouncing. Go on.
And well, I was going to say the same for two avoidant people, as long as the levels of avoidant are fairly similar again, they can just live what seem to be fairly independent, emotionally independent lives, at least, might have great connection, great friendship, great strength in their relationship, but not be overly connected emotionally. That happens as well. But as soon as there's much of a difference, somebody who is maybe avoidant in relation to the high avoidance of the other, they might really need to know, so they might feel more like they're anxiously attached then.
I'm going to have a look at the little slide to see what other kinds of things happen, because we both know ourselves, which is easy to talk about. Okay, so to go on that though, I might just jump back out of this, because then what we were going to talk about is how people who are avoidant became that way. And you talked about it a little bit, but let's maybe recap. Yeah, stop sharing. Are you there?
I'm here.
I'm not very good at this.
Were you going to put up a different slide there?
No, I was just going to talk, because that one doesn't actually name which things are. But if you were to just off the top of your head think about why someone is avoidant, like what happened to them when they were younger, or what needs weren't met. So yeah, what was their experience and how come they're being avoidant now?
Yes. So the person that we most relied on to have our emotional development or comfort or whatever was not available for us. So they didn't have the gear, not able to do that, or they didn't do that. They were too busy. They might have been highly successful people and have been too busy to be available for their children or something like that. So which one here? Not being shamed, having adult respect.
So this an avoidant person would be overly independent.
Yes.
I'm not saying that they're definitely controlling, but what else? Inability to fully trust, need to control.
Yes.
Allowing space. Yeah, so they needed to have people who were able to protect them and care for them, and didn't maybe have that, or maybe had too many responsibilities, perhaps.
Yes, so those things might go, you feel then if you have too many responsibility, you might not be allowed to have your own emotional needs. So if you're the first of a few children who are born in rapid succession, the parents are busy, it's often a go-to thing that the mother or father might say, Johnny, can you look after Susie or whatever it is?
That was definitely me as the eldest. So I don't know, there's something I was going to say, I forgot. Oh, you were saying too earlier before we jumped on recording that if someone is avoidant, they quite possibly have spent a lot of time dissociated, or in freeze. What was it you were saying?
No, that is more the disorganized type. So no, you're right, actually, because this framework we've got up here calls the disorganized type the fearful avoidant type. So that was a little bit of clarification. Sometimes the terms are different and people should be aware of that. It was quite confusing.
We'll chat about that after.
It can be a bit confusing, but you're right about that. The fearful avoidant is the disorganized type.
So what we're talking about, for those who don't know, is dissociation is when you're not quite present in your body. You've slipped out a bit. So like you're literally avoiding life by slipping out and being a bit dissociated.
Or a lot. The spectrum for dissociation goes from daydreaming to what used to be called multiple personality disorder and is now called
dissociative identity disorder.
Thank you very much.
Oh, good. So let's have another look. Being overly defensive from real or perceived criticism. So, oh my gosh, I had an ex like that. I remember saying once oh, hey, do you mind taking the bin out? And it was just friendly. I was doing something. And they lost it at me about something, but that person had ADHD, and with that comes something called rejection sensitivity. But anyway, so this is talking about the fact that you're grown up, you're defensive, and what happened when you were younger is you were shamed and you were probably yelled at and just needed to be reassured.
Yeah. So that would be, in my mind, an anxious attachment style. You're worried about, you wouldn't be defensive. If you were avoidant, you wouldn't really care whether the people could think
Yeah,
of
that's
you,
true.
because that's what we gear ourselves towards.
Because you want to feel loved, and that's what this is, the need that wasn't met as a child was the
The
need to
anxious
be worthy.
person. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
and
So
lovable.
we don't know. I don't know where this comes from, but so these might not fit neatly into my framework, but
I don't
it's
think we
worth
need to
knowing.
talk about the framework too much yet.
Yeah.
I'd like to recap that properly at the end and just chat a bit more about, like, you talk about, like, you know, there's anxiety and there's fear and stuff like that. But really, like in the real world, someone's going to get annoyed because their partner gets defensive all the time, or they're going to be annoyed because their partner avoids communicating. Like, you know, when I guess, yeah. So if someone is completely avoiding communication and they don't want to have a hard conversation,
Yeah.
and why are they like that? And I guess that's probably because communicating wasn't safe when they were younger.
Yeah. They don't want to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We won't go through all these one by one, but are there any examples that stand out? Like, for me, these controlling ones are important because I've had relationships where I've been really controlled. And it's interesting, I recognize there's something I specifically want. And it probably sounds silly saying it out loud, but in a relationship, I want to be with somebody who won't feel emasculated by me.
Right.
Because the cost of being with men who feel small and don't have their own thing is they try to destroy me and control me. And I've got, you know, a shiny, bright star that I'd like to keep shiny, bright, you know. And so this is another thing I'm going to just jump in and say as well, is it's all well and good to understand. I think it's good to understand other people and get some tools to communicate properly and helpfully. And we have some that we'll be able to provide after. But the reason someone is messed up isn't your job to fix. So it's not my job to fix my controlling partner. You know, it's my job to set boundaries, have compassion where needed, hold my boundaries and leave if that's what I need to do. And I think the thing that I'm really, really passionate about sharing with the world is it's actually our job to fix ourselves, to minimize our footprint on the world. So
yes. Well said.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say that we're sitting here unpacking behaviors and, why did this happen and why did that happen? Why is kind of actually none of your business in a way.
That's right.
But if we just turn the lens inward, which one of the reasons of talking about it externally is it's a bit safer. Like if we were to sit there and go, look at yourself now, did this happen to you or whatever, or do you behave like this? Then this is what happened, go fix it. That can be a bit hard. So it's good in one way to go, here's some different examples of what X looks like, but don't go around, you know, analysing everybody else and trying to fix everybody else because it's our job to fix ourselves. That's my rant over. But controlling men for me, what do we learn here? Is there anything you would like to say on control? So someone who is controlling.
So what had occurred to me to say when you were talking about, you know, when you say this is the behavior of my partner, I just need to keep my shit together, for lack of a better word. That of course, the flaw in that ointment, or the fly in that ointment, is you'll probably get triggered, right? So keeping your shit together is not going to be as easy as all of that, unless you're a securely attached person. And because a securely attached person can do precisely that, just speak out of their lack of insecurity and have those conversations with people. So we get triggered. In fact, probably people attract each other who, there's probably two dynamics at work there. They will collude with each other and look to be comfortable with each other, and therefore there won't be any growth. And that's safe and fine. There's no, you know, it's not my business to criticize that. Or people who really trigger each other. And what stands behind that, Carl Jung would say, you know, it's opposites that help us to become whole if we can move in the direction of what they have to offer. However, we can get triggered there, and then by the nature of the word trigger, not be able to control our response to that person.
Yeah. And that's why I was saying about leaving. There's times that you need to leave. If the other person isn't willing to have conversations and do the work of healing and growing, then that's none of your business to try to fix it and argue with it and force it. And that's probably one of my biggest lessons is, you know, like you're getting with someone and you think it's all hunky-dory, and then next thing you know, They're not a grower. And I end up being somebody that I don't like when I'm arguing to save our relationship or whatever. And it's like, well, if you're not fighting for it, I'm not fighting for it. Like, I'm just going to keep working on myself, buddy.
I think a lot of relationships fail on exactly that basis, that one person feels they need to change the other.
And I just don't, after the things I've been through and learned, I just don't see a need to fight. Like, I'm much better at communicating boundaries. And I still probably struggle with it, the most helpful wording, but like the way I see it, and I've spoken with other people about it, is you simply can say, I mean, this is what I need. You do what you want with that. Hopefully you love me enough to whatever, or love yourself enough, whatever. But this is what I need. And then when it doesn't actually happen, or they do the opposite, then it's actually for me to make a choice. It's not to argue. It's not to push. It's not to force. It's not to blame or go, oh, well, you said you would, blah. It's okay, well, we're not fitting very well. If my needs aren't being met, then I'm not going to argue about it.
I suspect there's been a lot of water under the bridge for you to come to that kind of clarity, right?
Yeah, now I feel like crying. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and there's nothing wrong with crying. You can normalize crying for the people watching, because it's a normal human response.
Very much so.
Yeah. And so even, when I say water under the bridge for you to come to that, there's coming to that as an understanding, but it's even more difficult to actually in the spot be able to do and say those things.
You know what though? Like, I've had friendships end as well. And I can sit with my own stuff while I work through it without having to fight about it. So something happened, I don't even know anymore. It wasn't last year, the end of the year before last. But anyway, female friend sent me a really, really, really harsh message, and I did not know what to do with it, and I couldn't do anything with it. And I just didn't do anything with it until I'd found some calm and some clarity. And I think I really, really do mean it and can do that. And there's just no need to fight. So what I ended up doing eventually was I wrote her a letter, and it's again up to you what you do with that letter. It's up to you if you embrace it and care about it or ignore it. I'm not going to fight about it. And to be honest, it's something, see if we're on track in a minute. My own violence is, I guess, the driver. So you can't blame someone in a relationship. So someone doesn't do a thing and the other person gets angry and goes, oh, but you did blah. It doesn't justify your shitty behavior. You don't, and that's a big driver for me. I can't remember what my point was. Told you my meds aren't working this week. Anyway, back to attachments. So I don't know. Is there a point I was?
Do you have that?
Can you think of it?
Sorry, no, I can't help you right now with that. I'd love to, but do you have that one with just the different types and the 5 or 6 points describing each type? Because that might help people clarify a bit more.
Yeah.
So we're moving now from the right brain conversation to the left brain.
And I think we went there,
styles.
Yeah, because we were just saying about how it's not actually your problem to analyze and work out why someone did something, but it's good to understand yourself and others and heal what we can. Now, we can see everything. I'll move this.
That's a good one. Yeah.
This is the one.
Yeah.
See all my tabs. Anyway, so did you want to touch on this a little bit? I'd love to talk about moving through attachment.
About moving through attachment. Is that what you said?
To secure attachment. So theoretically. Yeah. Anyway, healing. Let's talk about the attachment styles. So as I was saying earlier, I'm a mix of these three when tested, which is interesting.
Right. Do you think you'd be different now?
Yeah, that's why I was thinking of doing another test. Yeah.
Yeah, because you've come a long way, haven't you?
Yeah, I did one on Gabby Bernstein's site, which is a really simple one, and it said I was secure, and I was like, bollocks, but maybe I am. Who knows? I'll find a harder one.
Yeah. So yes, I think we've conveyed what the securely attached person looks like. Generally speaking, low anxiety and low avoidance. They're comfortable in relationships with intimacy. They're self-confident. The dismissive avoidant, so that's mostly what I've been talking about in terms of avoidant. So they have low anxiety, but high avoidance. So the high avoidance enables them to keep the low anxiety, if you know what I mean. That's their aim, to have low anxiety. And when people make emotional demands on them, then they're going to get anxious. So they'll probably get more highly avoidant.
So, like, when I shared that story about the guy and he just ran away, that was probably anxiety.
Yeah.
Like, there's going to be demands on me. Fuck, run.
Yeah.
And off he popped.
Yeah. And so the characteristics of that dismissive avoidant type, and I fall into the category. In fact, my brother and sister both fall, because it was our shared early environment, very self-sufficient. So you can admire the sort of independence and self-sufficiency of the avoidant type, the dismissive avoidant type. Avoid emotional intimacy unless you're in relationship with them. Usually does not initiate or seek deep relationships.
And the thing for these people, like, if people are very strongly like that, I feel for people, like, it's kind of like they do want to be with people, but they also are terrified of it or something.
But they can be with people, just not in that deep emotional connected way. So I've always been quite an extrovert. I'm really good at friendships. In fact, I'm much better at intimacy now at this stage of life where, well, I'd have to call myself, when are you an elder citizen? I'm not sure. But a whole lot of shit goes out the window over time, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm much easier now in meaningful relationships. And I'm a counselor. I have to have intimacy with my clients. And also I no longer equate intimacy with vulnerability. But that's quite a journey for me to come to. And it's only in the last few years when I hope, or maybe I make an assumption that, I'm not particularly an object of sexual attraction for people anymore, so I can avoid people wanting me in the sense that makes me avoid.
And that's something I know we've talked about with my healing journey as well, like being wanted for one thing has actually had me holding on weight and self-sabotaging the shit out of myself because I don't want to be looked at and I don't want to be taken from. And it's becoming stronger in my communication around boundaries and my needs so I can feel safe to express myself, to not be taken from if I'm a hottie, and knowing I can look after myself physically is why I've done boxing and martial arts and things like that.
Right. Yeah. Excellent.
So, the Body Keeps the Score talks about body autonomy as a way of, like, martial arts supporting body autonomy for safety.
Yeah.
And it affects a lot of things, but So next one, preoccupied anxious.
So these are people with high anxiety and low avoidance because what they need is the assurance that they are loved, basically. And so they need to be in there. They need the kind of feedback, but they're not going to get constant feedback. And so they'll often be anxious about, their partner has been away now, went out with their mates. They've been away for 3 hours now. What's going on?
And no message.
No message.
And that's the thing I've been talking about a little bit lately. And I think this is at the root of secure attachment, is knowing that you're going to be okay anyway, whatever happens. Yeah. If your partner cheats on you, guess what? You're going to be okay. Or you can be, and you can do what needs to happen. And that's the thing that I've learned. I was going to share something about the other day. I'm going too late. I thought it was a bit rough, but I was like, you can go through all these things and actually be okay. You don't actually have to not be okay,
Yes.
And I feel like that's the answer to a lot of this. But then, do you think that you have to have secure attachments with some people to be able to develop that in yourself? Like, you have been, don't want to cry again, but you've been a very secure person for me. There's a couple of other people around, and it's like having good people around you helps you know that you're actually strong and good. Yeah.
So I would probably word that in the vernacular of trauma. And so we have in the past talked about dysregulation, co-regulation, and self-regulation. And when we are dysregulated, when we're an emotional mess, we need to regulate, and the best way to do that is through somebody who is regulated. So that's called co-regulation then. Because I'm so awake in my nervous system, I can sense safety and not safety. And so I gravitate towards people that feel safe to me. Because with those people, I can co-regulate. I can get myself back together. I don't feel threatened, and move from co-regulation to self-regulation.
Yeah. And that's like the lady that I was doing breath work with, which I'll definitely do again. Actually being a safe person to go to some dark, crying places, and be held and be safe with somebody. So that's definitely part of it all. We were talking about preoccupied, anxious. So they're high anxiety, low avoidance. They're worried about losing their partner and they're losing their connection. So they obsess and go over the top in how they hook into people sometimes. Obviously, I don't enjoy being hooked into.
Well, that's what it feels like to the avoidant type, right? I'm being hooked into, but it feels worse to us because we're avoidant.
Yeah.
Right. So it's part us in there.
Thank you. It's actually okay to reassure people and help people feel safe. That's the other thing, you don't also, little TED Talk rant coming, but, you wouldn't look at someone and go, oh, you're preoccupied, anxious, go fucking work it out. Like, it's like, oh, come with some compassion. Oh, you're preoccupied, anxious. I'm going to reassure you sometimes, but I'm also not going to buy into the drama and do it all the time. You need to, that person needs to feel safe and develop their own inner strength. But part of that is feeling safe. But the thing there, that's a difficult one, I think. But you wouldn't want to, do it all the time. No. I don't know how you'd handle that. An honest conversation, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, again, an avoidant type wouldn't handle that very well if they had to do that all the time.
Yeah, that's right. But it's also, that's how come, like I said earlier, it's everybody's job to grow and heal themselves.
Yes. So you describe those characteristics very well. We don't have to read those now because you literally said those things. And then we have the other type, which I've always described as a mix of the avoidant and anxious type. But in this framework, it's called the fearful avoidant or disorganized type. So in my thinking, I do call it the disorganized type. But it's interesting to put that slant on it as the fearful avoidant type. And it doesn't feel like they're avoidant because they do have high anxiety, right? So the avoidant type avoids anxiety. But now we have somebody with the high avoidance of the anxious type, or high anxiety of the anxious type, but also the high avoidance of the dismissive avoidant type. And so, the literature would say that if people are diagnosed with, again, I don't want to label people, and I think lots of labels in the light of developmental trauma, which is only becoming better known now. A lot of these labels will get thrown out because they are all subsumed under the umbrella of early trauma or developmental trauma. But what I was going to say is that the personality disorders arise here. That's the current understanding, at least. But you can see that these people, they had it both ways. I think in previous conversations, we talked about this a bit. I think an example where this might arise is if your primary attachment person is somebody who might have, for example, been bipolar and get hot and cold, or had some sort of mental health disorder, whereby one moment you might have felt embraced and loved and squeezed all up and it was lovely, and the next moment you were just dismissed as a speck. And that happens. I hear those stories from clients. And so you've got both of those things going. The person that you need to move toward for your attachment is also the person you need to move away from for your safety. So there's a bit of a bind to be in.
Yeah. And there's a thing my dog does when you go to pat him. He pushes you away, but he also wants to be patted. And my ex and I used to always joke, that's basically me. I'm like, love me, but from over there. God, right. So I definitely relate to that one more strongly. Like, I'm definitely self-sufficient, but I don't mind being close to people. I love deep relationships, and being really connected with people, but not like many.
So what it says there in the right-hand corner, the characteristics desires closeness but has a hard time trusting. You can see why.
Yeah.
They fear rejection and abandonment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it is helpful. It's helpful if we can identify ourselves they're all spectrums. I don't know if spectrum has a plural other than spectrums, but wherever we locate ourselves there, as you made the point earlier, it's a matter of degrees, and we're not all emotional messes in relationships, even if we're insecurely attached. I don't know. I know that I spoke there as if there was a second part to that.
Yeah, I think that we're talking about, though, and I've got some resources that we'll share and link. When we have the podcast, there'll be a link where you can actually download some things that help. I've got an absolute favorite, and I'll just talk through it now. But I think the point is to do the healing work, So and I guess, I don't know if we could really quickly touch on that. I might be able to. I notice in myself my fear of rejection and abandonment, and I notice it as mine. And it's not somebody else's to have to deal with. And so then that's where that self-regulation comes in, when you notice an unhelpful thought and then work through breathing about it. And then if you are in a safe relationship, you can talk about it as well. Say, oh, hey, I really struggle with this. The thing that would be helpful would be blah. But again, you're not making it their responsibility to completely, you might be like, okay, maybe I do need to have a reassuring text message every so often that we're good. So when we're talking about do the work of healing, and then you're going to heal the original wound that caused that, and that could actually even be forgiveness. That's not for everybody, and that's a big conversation. But like that forgiveness and compassion for parents comes from the stuff we were talking about earlier, actually understanding the context of their lives, so that perhaps you can come at that with some grace and then keep moving. I've talked to my son. I know he's had some chats with you here and there in life. And I remember him saying, because I apologize to something for him, like every so often I'll realize something and I'll go, oh, hey, I realized this about bringing you up, whatever. And remember when I said growing up together? So true. And he said to me one day, he goes, oh, Gary said that we don't really need to worry about that, Mum. Like, as in, we all have our own stories. Our work is just to heal. So.
Yeah. And I was also wanting to say that so there's lots of counter indications about whether or not people need to revisit their original trauma.
That's
and really, it's really up to the individual as to whether or not they want to go there. But I'll say another thing about that. I think in one way or another, it's very helpful to do that, but we don't need to evoke the other person or persons. And so I think you had an experience of bringing your higher self to bear on your, the wounded child, if we can use that kind of language here. And there is a very wise part of you that is true, whether or not you realize it every day, but we all have that in us, right? And through inner imagery work, we can heal our own inner child through our own inner wise one.
That was when I learned about reparenting, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I know we've talked about this book before, the 8 Keys to Something by Babette Child, and it talks about creating safety in your life and body. You don't go jumping around looking at your trauma if your base level needs in life aren't met and you don't have a safe body or a safe place to land and heal. So, and you 100% don't need to, I say it all the time, one, we don't need to talk about it, talk therapy, but the healing that I've done on the things as I've needed, like in breath work and things like that, I don't go in there deliberately going, oh yeah, I'm going to look at this today. It's, we explore the body and where the tension is and breathe into it and what comes up, and have that space to make the space and have a safe place to allow things to happen when you're safe to. Lovely. So I won't show this. Actually, no, I will show this resource now. Just talk through it real super fast, just because people listening to a podcast aren't going to be able to see it. Oh, how many tabs do you want to open, Andrea? 2,700. That is a sign that we're not supposed to do it. I'm not doing it. Don't worry about it. maybe I am. This one, yeah. This one here explains the different kinds of attachment styles, but then also how to communicate your own needs, which is super important. And then also some healing tips. And I didn't make this. I just think it's so amazing as a resource. And
Actually, sorry, but that is a great tool. I remember once before, you showed me that once before a fair while ago, and you worked with it at that time. And later on, I said, what was that tool again? And I think you couldn't remember, or maybe I didn't explain
I've downloaded them all, so I'm going to number them and I'll be able to email them. But these ways of communicating with somebody who is struggling, tips and tricks. So I think that's a really, really helpful tool. So any questions, let us know. What we
I have a question.
Gary, I'm stop sharing.
Could you send me the link to that?
Yes, sure can.
Because I'm teaching workshops shortly, and that's a good tool to have, because it brings things down. It gives people something to work with, doesn't it?
Well, I literally have used it to have a conversation and copied what it said.
I remember.
And then it worked, and it was like, oh wow, okay, cool. And then so I used what it said to communicate to somebody else, like using how to communicate with somebody who is blah, but then also how to communicate your needs as someone who is blah. So this is what I'm needing and what I'm feeling. And I was like, wow, what a way to do life. That just needs to live in my phone.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
Love it. Thank you. Have you got any final words?
No, have a break, everybody. I had a very distressed client this morning who could only do a telephone session this morning because, anyway, for lots of reasons, but the overwhelming feeling that I had, it was hard to know how to help him very practically, but I said it would be really helpful if you could, for you, just close your eyes and have some rest. And I know that stillness eludes him, but nevertheless, I think that, a few deep breaths, closed eyes, just diminish the sense impressions when you're feeling anxious. And, if you're lucky enough to have a pool or be near the beach or go for a walk or something, those things are all calming things. They know these things now through neuroscience, right? What a walk in the forest can do for you.
And I've been making a resource that's got like my 5 favorite tools for calming, being triggered, and dissociation. So
yeah, good on you. Yeah.
Stuff. And I'd love to maybe next week, because I have surgery in the morning. We can do the afternoon.
How exciting.
I know, but what I was going to say, the meditation that you did with me that takes us to our higher self, that would be so lovely. Maybe if you do that next Friday afternoon, because I'll be after surgery and I'll be like, yeah, man, that's the bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Cool, I'll check my diary, but let's put it in the realm of possibility.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for joining me again, Gary. And thank you everyone for watching and listening. And we'll see you again soon.
Send in your questions, as you were going to say before.
Do. Thank you. Bye. Hey folks, as promised, I'm here to give you some takeaways for the end. There should be some commentary on this in the show notes so that you can come back to it. If there is anything linkable, that's where it will be. A couple of things. Start paying attention to your body. So notice how it responds to stress, movement, rest. I'm going to just expand on that beyond my script. A lot of us aren't present in our body. So if you're one of those people who are rushing to the toilet, they're like, I need to go to the toilet, you're probably not actually present in your body and paying attention to the early signals. I was having a discussion with someone online the other day and they were trying to say not everyone is the same. Not everyone can have somatic therapy. Not everyone can even feel their bodies. I'm like, yeah, dude, that's a sign that you need somatic therapy. And I unpacked that with them a little bit more. I think my dog's about to come in. No, he just plonked himself on the floor. So you start by doing simple things like putting your feet on the floor and feeling your feet on the floor. Feel your bum in the chair. There's a bunch of things. I'll put more videos up about it. And I have a bunch in my subscription. But yeah, pay attention to little things like noticing that your bowel is full, for example. Noticing that I trained yesterday, now I'm really, really tired. So maybe that means you overtrained and you need to pull back a little bit. And as a personal trainer and fitness coach, I teach people, and I do this myself, to you document what you're doing and document how you're feeling the next day, and then observe whether you need to pull back. Give yourself permission to take things slowly, take them at your own pace. Healing and growth don't have to look like pushing hard all the time, which it did for me for a long time, and I've been pulled up on it plenty of times. Taking it slow is the best gift you can give yourself. My third, and I think it's my final tip, is try one small shift. So whether it's getting outside first thing in the morning, again, Andrew Huberman's big thing is sunlight. So if you can get sunlight in the first half hour of waking up, so have your breakfast outside, have your coffee outside, grab a coffee in a takeaway cup. Oh, there's my light that makes me look pretty. Take your coffee and go for a walk. Do your training outside. Do your journaling outside. At least do that. Now, you don't look at the sun. I've seen people write on his posts, am I supposed to look at the sun? No, you're not supposed to look at the damn sun. You're supposed to look at the top of a tree, is what my psychiatrist said. That's what she prescribed me for my ADHD and my sleep, plus some melatonin, but that's not medical advice, and I don't recommend that very often for very long. So one, that will help you feel better. Get out of bed. My biggest life hack, it's probably not my biggest one, but is to have an alarm clock that is nowhere near you, like an old school alarm clock, in a different room. So you've got to get up, put it by the coffee pot so that you're like, alarm clock, you suck, I hate waking up. Oh, coffee. That's what happens to me every day. What else? Get outside in the morning, focus on deep breathing. So just try to start one practice. And I'm talking about, we're talking about attachment theory, right? For you to be able to have healthy conversations, for you to be able to start to notice what's happening in your body so that you can start to pause. So, I don't know how many years ago it was, probably 10 to 13 years ago, I was in therapy and I learned about the space between stimulus and response, and I was like, I'm going to make that my life's work. Turns out that's really, 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 really hard to do. So that space between stimulus and response is where you start to pause so that you can have healthy relationships and have healthy conversations, and leave the room for 5 minutes to regulate yourself with some sip, sigh breaths or whatever. So to recap, regulate by keeping it simple to begin with. Build up one practice, getting outside, getting sunlight, focusing on deep breathing, move in a way that feels good, that's not forced, it's not over the top. The key is consistency, not intensity. So I'll finish off by saying, if this episode spoke to you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, take care and support in a way that moves you. I said that backwards. Move in a way that supports you. Thank you for joining the conversation and doing your bit to make the world a better place. Thank you. Bye.